Our speaker tonight, Mark Mix, is the president of the National Right to Work Legal Defense Foundation, a position he's held since 2003. Under his leadership, the foundation has provided free legal assistance to workers caught up in the dragnet of compulsory unionism. He's also a leader in the fight to establish the principle of the right to work, the right of every American to work for a living without belonging to a union. His organization has had a number of notable successes, which I hope you'll share with us tonight, at the individual level, defending people who just want to work for a living without being victimized by union coercion, and at the state level. 24 states now have right-to-work laws on the books. Mr. Mix appears frequently on such networks as Fox, CNBC, and CNN. His writings have appeared in the Wall Street Journal, the Washington Times, Investor's Business Daily, and National Review. He travels across the country speaking about political technology, grassroots lobbying tactics, and the political process. Please help me welcome Mr. Mark Mix.
Thank you very much. Is that mic working for us? Is that working out there okay? Oh, great. I am afraid of podiums, as you might guess. Oftentimes I get confronted with those that are taller than me, so I've learned to stand beside them now, which is pretty important. So I used to say that I'll be short, but I already am short, and I'll try to be brief. Thank you for the opportunity to be with you this afternoon, this evening. I guess it's 10 o'clock my time, I guess. I should say that. I'll probably fall asleep in about 15 minutes. If I do, just throw some water on me and rouse me up. But it's a pleasure to be with you here today. I want to start off by telling you a story of a woman by the name of Pamela Harris. Pamela Harris is a mother. She has a son by the name of Joshua, who's 25 years old. And he is developmentally disabled. He has a very serious learning disorder. He cannot take care of himself. Pam Harris is just a mother who takes care of her 25-year-old son in her home in the suburbs of Chicago, Illinois. Pam Harris, on June 30th of this year, was in front of the United States Supreme Court, the highest court in the land. And she presented the court with a case that actually said that she could perhaps be forced to pay a union, the Service Employees International Union, in order to take care of her own child in her own home. I think of no better example of how to explain the power of organized labor to you and the power of compulsory unionism than telling the story of Pam Harris. Pam and seven other plaintiffs had an oral argument on January 21st of this year in front of the 9 justices of the court. And the question in front of the court was very simple. Could a union that had special favors from a governor who was now in a federal penitentiary, I mean to get into that part of it, that's another part of the story, but can a union who had special favors from this governor force parents and family members to pay them a fee in order to take care of their own children in their own home? Joel mentioned briefly about the power of organized labor and the fact that they're an $11 billion a year organization. Actually, they're a $20 billion a year business. $11 billion each year in dues money alone, but they have other interests as well. But this particular union, the Service Employee International Union, invested a tremendous amount of money in then Governor Blagojevich's campaign. And shortly after that campaign was over, he signed an executive order saying that personal care providers in Illinois would be forced to pay a fee out of a Medicaid stipend designated for the client, the patient, the person who was disabled, for their care, could be skimmed off and sent to them to lobby in Springfield, Illinois. What that actually says is that I can force Joel to pay me to have me speak for him and redress his government. If there was a simpler way to explain the issue of compulsory unionism, I can't think of what it would be. But the notion that in a country founded on individual freedom, in a grand experiment of self-government, where certain rights of individuals should never be subjected to a vote, we have a state that can sign an executive order, sign a piece of paper, a pen and a phone, we've heard that before, and force literally tens of thousands of parents who take care of their own children and provide care for their family to pay a fee to the union. Fortunately, we won that Harris v. Quinn case in the U.S. Supreme Court. And the beauty of that case, ladies and gentlemen, should us all hope that it's worth continuing to fight in our country. I know that you know that tonight. I know that you do. You're here because you believe in who we are and what we are as a country, and who we are and what we are as a democratic republic. You believe in who we are and the opportunities that America has presented, not just us, but those before us and those before them. And it was a grand experiment in individual freedom. And somehow it seems like the country's lost its way. On so many issues, we can tick them off. I don't know much about other stuff, but I do know about the issue of forced unionism. And I know since 1935, forced unionism has put an institution, i.e. labor unions, in a strange position. In a position where they're more interested in what happens in Sacramento. In a position where they're more interested in what happens in Washington, D.C., than they are in what happens on the shop floor for the very workers they claim to represent. You know, if you're going to go to government and get special privilege, and you build a business model based on that special privilege, you're going to have to stay involved in politics. And that's why organized labor is one of the biggest players in politics, because the powers they've been given over individual citizens are unique to them and to only them. It's quite a story of political power. We go back to 1935, Franklin Roosevelt. You know, the country's in great straits, financial straits. And the New Deal shows itself in the face of the country, and we're passing all kinds of new federal laws. And one of those federal laws we passed is a federal labor policy. It was called the Wagner Act at the time. And it was a similar piece of legislation to something that the United States Supreme Court had just ruled as unconstitutional, the National Industrial Recovery Act. So Franklin Roosevelt tees up legislation. He goes to his favorite Congressman Robert Wagner. He says, put this bill in. We're going to pass a federal labor policy. And pass it they did. It went through the House, went through the Senate. The President signed it. But there was a question of constitutionality. And because the Supreme Court had just ruled on a very similar bill, that it was not a proper role of government to be involved in the industrial labor policy of the states, there was a great prediction that the Supreme Court would overrule the Wagner Act as well. And as I was telling a small group this evening, that's when Franklin Roosevelt stepped up to the plate and said, we've got to make sure the Supreme Court rules correctly on this. And he had a brief conversation. I'm using a little bit of enhancement of history because I wasn't there. But I'll tell you what I think happened. He went to the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court and said, I need the Wagner Act to be ruled constitutional. And in 1937, they had this argument. And Roosevelt thought, well, it's possible these 9 justices may not comply. So what did he do? He came up with a program to give each justice who was over 70 years old an associate justice. It turned out there would be 6 more justices on the U.S. Supreme Court, and we get to 15. And the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, thinking about the decorum of the court and the institution, the tradition of the court, said, well, maybe we can find a way around this constitutionality issue, and they upheld the Wagner Act. So since 1937, we've had a federal labor policy that is premised on the idea that I can take away your rights, I can take them to myself, and I can force you to pay for those rights. You know, in common law, for those of you, is any lawyers in the room? I hope. Good. Okay. What are the elements of a contract? Give me 3 of the 4 elements of a contract. Real basic. Offer means something. There's be something out there. An offer. Acceptance. That's right. Consideration. No duress. And it has to be legal, right? Okay, so let's go over it again. There has to be a meeting of the minds, an offer and acceptance, meeting of the minds. No duress, meaning I can't twist your arm to accept the contract. It has to be legal, and there has to be consideration. There has to be value on both sides. That's common law agency doctrine. In order for this lawyer and I to create an agency relationship, we must meet that test for a contract. But in labor policy, we have completely stood that notion on its head. I can create an agency relationship as a union official for all of you in this room. If I can get this side to vote for me, and half of this group to vote for me, we can apply everything that we want to do to all of you without your consent, without a meeting of the minds, without consideration, and certainly with duress. That, ladies and gentlemen, is American labor policy in a nutshell. And it's wrong. It gets everything that we've established in our legal system for how we interact with each other. Union officials would do right well if they would focus on the workers they want to represent and pay attention to what their needs are and listen to them and represent those workers that would want their representation and would agree to it and would pay for it and would think it would do something beneficial to them. But no, since 1935, across all 50 states, they've had the ability to force workers into this agency relationship, and then to add insult to injury, they can make you pay for it. What an outrage. What a special privilege. And the manifestation of that privilege for organized labor has turned them into a political force where not only does one union spend $238 million, all unions in 2011 and 2012 spent $1.7 billion on politics and lobbying by their own admission. That's what they report. We know it's more than that, but we don't have to make things up. It's $1.7 billion. Why do they spend that much money? One California union official put it very succinctly. It's kind of neat that you can elect your own boss. When government union officials are sitting down across the table negotiating over your tax dollars, they're probably negotiating with someone they spent a whole lot of money to put in that office. And the favor flow that goes back and forth is this vicious spiral. Union officials are given the power to force workers to pay dues. They use those dues to turn around to elect politicians. They grant them more power to force more workers to pay dues, which creates more dues for the union officials that can spend more money on politics. It is a vicious cycle. And the only thing that can break that cycle is restoring the freedom of American workers to choose whether or not they want to be in a labor union. In 24 states, we've done that. 24 states have actually passed laws that say you cannot force a worker to pay dues or fees to get or keep a job. And ladies and gentlemen, I'm here to tell you, if Michigan can do it, which they did in December of 2012, California can probably do it too. The idea of freedom in America's workplace, the idea of freedom for government workers across the country is an idea that's gaining momentum, gaining power, and gaining supporters across the country. I'll take you back to Act 10 in Wisconsin. Those of you who couldn't be around a TV in 2011 and not hear about Scott Walker in Wisconsin. Scott Walker came into office facing a $3.6 billion deficit. He looked at the operation of his government and said the biggest cost we've got is our labor costs. If we're going to reform government, we've got to reform our labor relations. And you'd think that Scott Walker eliminated unions and did away with them as an institution and they'll never be seen again, based on the reaction of organized labor. Ladies and gentlemen, what he did do was he reformed the bargaining system. They didn't eliminate bargaining. You always hear the newspaper, oh, he eliminated bargaining. No, he didn't. He should have, but he didn't. They still bargain over wages there, and pretty soon, 10 years from now, they'll bargain over wages and this, and they'll add more and more. He could have had a chance to end the whole thing. But what he did do, and what was important, is he gave government employees in Wisconsin the right to choose whether or not to financially support a labor union. And the irony of all this is that Wisconsin was the first state, the first progressive state, to say, we're going to let union officials represent our government employees. So it's almost righteous, it's almost karma, whatever word you want to use, that Wisconsin would be the state that would be the poster child for dramatic reforms in labor relations in the public sector. What's happened in Wisconsin since? They have almost $1 billion rainy day fund. School districts no longer have to lay off teachers in the summer and then hire back a certain number because school districts are actually have the privilege of negotiating for health care packages that cost somewhere south of 40% of what they were when they only could negotiate with the unions over health care. School districts save money. Even the most liberal school districts, the most progressive school districts, kind of shaking their head and winking and saying, this isn't as bad as we thought it was going to be. Because now they actually are solvent fiscally. Now, we never want to stop any individual from joining a labor union. Nothing in the law, in the right to work states, or under federal law prohibits anyone from joining a labor union. And if you want to join a labor union and pay dues, you do that to your heart's content. Absolutely, positively, we would not interfere with that. Organized labor and unions are private organizations just like this. You come because hopefully, and maybe tonight's the exception, you come because you get good speeches. And you pay and you support the organization. That's the model for organized labor. And you know, it was the model of organized labor when they came to the United States shores back in the late 1800s and the early 1900s. Samuel Gompers, the founder of the AFL, called the father of unionism in America. You know what he said? He said that voluntarism is the core principle of the American worker. The American worker abhors any institution that compels them. And that's what brought together through voluntarism is inherently stronger than anything we can cobble together through compulsion. That makes a lot of sense, doesn't it? If you join a group voluntarily, you're more interested in the success and the activities and the promotions of that particular group. If you're forced to join and forced to be here, you can be like my daughter who falls asleep in high school class because she's forced to be here. Samuel Gompers warned the delegates to AFL when he found out that they were going to go to Congress, they got to get new privileges granted to them. He said, once we do that, once we rely on the government for our power, that's when organized labor will start to deteriorate and start to lose their focus on the workers. I'm paraphrasing, of course, but Gompers tried to deliver that speech. He actually wrote a speech that he didn't have the strength to deliver in his final speech to the unionists and the delegates of the AFL convention. The workers of America adhere to voluntary institutions. The people of America adhere to voluntary institutions. The government in Sacramento adheres to compulsory institutions to feather their political nets. There's a direct conflict between what organized labor was, is, and could be if they decided they were going to work for America's workers, represent America's workers, and focus on things that would be beneficial to them. You know, just yesterday, or I guess, yeah, yesterday, you would have heard that they're responsible for the 40-hour work week and weekends and vacations and all. You know, I had a union official tell me that we couldn't breathe the air in the building we were in if it weren't for organized labor. You know what my answer was to him? If you're doing all those things right, why do you need compulsion? Why do you need to force anyone to financially support you as a condition of their employment? They say, well, we know what's best for them. Well, you don't know what's best for them. You know, people often talk about the argument they make, well, we're forced to represent these workers in the workplace. And hopefully somebody was going to ask that question tonight, but I'll dispose of it right now. Yeah. Under current law, union officials have the opportunity to represent only those workers that want the representation. But they never do that. They want exclusive monopoly control of every place where they can initiate and institute themselves. They want to represent all of you because it's possible that Joel is the best lathe operator we got. He makes 8 widgets an hour, and this Mark Mix guy, he's a slather, he only makes 4. And if the boss noticed that Joel was making 8 and Mark was making 4, the boss may go over to Joel and say, hey, Joel, well done. Slip him a $20 bill. In a union shop, that'd be an unfair labor practice. You'd be breaking the law if you did that. That's why they want everyone in the collective, because they don't want anyone to shine on this side. They don't want anyone to get punished for being really bad on this side. They want everybody to sit in the middle, and everybody do just exactly what the contract says. No initiative, no incentive to do anything more. The only way you get a pay raise in most union shops is to stick around for an extra year. That's the kind of mentality that forces manufacturers to look elsewhere to locate their shops and invest money. We know in right-to-work states that fortunately we're able to get investment in states like South Carolina and North Carolina and Texas. Unfortunately, a lot of companies are moving to California. I think there's a website that tracks this, the companies that move it. You know, I looked at it one time, and a bunch of them were going to the right-to-work states. We do know this from an economic development standpoint, that, you know, there's a business of consultants that will help you if you're going to locate a business, if you're going to invest money, you have somebody, I'm looking for a new location. These people are experts in this, I'm told. And they say, these people we talked to in the poll, one guy testified at a congressional hearing, that in his business, he knows that 9 out of every 10 companies looking to expand or relocate consider right to work to be a determining factor whether or not they're going to locate their business there. So what does that mean for California? Even if it was 50%, that means 50% of the investment for new jobs and expansion of facilities, California never gets considered. Your tax base shrinks, right-to-work states prosper. It's been a good story for right-to-work states over the last 20, 25 years, particularly the last 10 years. It's been a great story. Tell you the story of Boeing. Many of you remember that story. Boeing manufactured building the new 787 Dreamliner. They have a great plant up in Renton, Washington. They have great engineers, great manufacturing up there. They weren't going to take one job from Washington State and move it anywhere. They were going to build a new facility to increase their production capability for this aircraft. They went to the machinist union up there and said, you know, we've got, at the time, I think it was 800 back orders for the aircraft. And they said, we can't afford a strike. The machinist union had struck, I think, 4 times over the last 20 years, cost the company something north of $1 billion. And they said, we need continuity in production. We need you to agree that if we have a dispute, we can go to mediation, we won't have a strike. The machinist said no. So Boeing went out and looked at another location. They ended up in North Charleston, South Carolina. They invested about $1 billion in building a facility, hired 1,000 workers, and 3 weeks before the company was about to open, The Machinist Union files a charge with the National Labor Relations Board, and President Obama's general counsel says, I agree there's a violation here, they're showing anti-union animus, and therefore we're going to file charges against Boeing. And the remedy in that case, all these cases have remedies. If you win the case, this is what you win. The remedy in that case, believe it or not, was that Boeing could not manufacture that aircraft in South Carolina if they lost the case. We went to Seattle, Washington as the proceedings opened up. We were there. We ended up representing Boeing employees in South Carolina who were going to lose their jobs if they lost. The court allowed us to intervene on their behalf as to the remedy. And so we litigated. We were involved in the litigation. We went to Seattle, and the administrative law judge gavels in the proceedings and immediately go into executive session. About a month later, they come back in front of the ALJ, and they say, the case is over. He says, what do you mean the case is over? I said, well, it's over. And the ALJ says, well, is there a settlement? Do we rule? I mean, we have a legal proceeding underway here. Something has to happen. They said, no, we'd like you to act as if it never happened. So there's no published decision. They just basically, they made an agreement, and the agreement was that the Machinist Union got a 4-year extension on a contract, a union contract, up in Washington State, and got a commitment to build a 737 MAX airframe up there when the contract wasn't set to expire for another 10 months. It was basically a negotiation on their part, and Boeing opens up. There are now 6,000 employees in North Charleston. They're building great aircraft down there. They just bought another 140 acres, I think, and are going to build a new flight line down there. And one of the things that they wanted was a right-to-work state. They won't tell you that. You can say it has nothing to do with it. But let me tell you something. In a right-to-work state where workers can hold union officials accountable because they can vote with their pocketbook, it makes a big difference. When union officials are spending money on politics that a worker disagrees with, what do they do in a right-to-work state? They say, stop, I'm not paying for that anymore. I'm not paying you anything. I think you can see how simple it is that it would hold union officials accountable, and it actually makes them accountable to rank and file workers. In California, we had a case. We took Diane Knox. Some of you may have heard of this case. We went to the U.S. Supreme Court in 2012. We won this case on behalf of 42,000 non-member union employees in California government back then. When the government in 2005, it was Governor Schwarzenegger, put ballot initiatives out on the ballot, and it would have rolled back curtailed union power. The unions went to the state government and said, we want you to take $60 out of every government employee's paycheck. Members, non-members, everybody, forward it to us. So the government state did that, took money out of all these state employees' work money. They used it as what they call a political pushback fund. That's what they call it in their own internal memos. And they used that to defeat those initiatives. 6 employees in California came to us, we represented them. We won the case at the district court level of the 9th Circuit. You all know what happened in the 9th Circuit Court of Appeals, right? What happened there? We lost, that's right. We went to the U.S. Supreme Court, we argued that case, and the Supreme Court agreed that this was a violation of the political rights of these non-members, and they created a new structure where union officials have to get workers to opt in to any special assessments as opposed to opt out. The previous structure was you had to opt out. You had to find out about it and say, I want out. And the union officials said, well, in order to get out, you've got to jump over the fire hydrant in front of the union hall. You got to cut down 2 trees, bring in 2 scalps, and have a dead cat. Bring it all here. No, that's not what's going to happen anymore under the Knox decision of the U.S. Supreme Court. Workers now, non-members everybody will have to opt into any special assessment that the union assesses instead of opting out. Huge, just a big change, a paradigm shift in how unions do business. The Harris v. Quinn case, the Knox case, are all part of a growing legal program that moves us along, albeit slowly for my purposes, but for purposes of exposing and rolling back the power of organized labor to compel workers to pay dues or fees is making a difference in America. We do that with the voluntary support of literally millions of Americans. I've talked to 2 people in here tonight that are supporters of ours. Thank you very much. Where's my friend? There he is. He's been a member since longer than I've been working for Right to Work, which is really great. Thank you. And I've been working with Right to Work for 27 years. I never would have guessed in a million years that I would be doing this work. It is now a passion for me. Getting a chance to taking a Pam Harris from initial complaint to the U.S. Supreme Court is a wonderful and magical thing. It proves to me and to others who watch and pay attention that the system can still work. And the system in America's workplace can work. Union officials have to get over this compulsory unionism power that they demand, desire, and fight so vociferously for. It's almost all of their identity now is making sure that the Right to Work Committee doesn't succeed. When the Harris case went to the U.S. Supreme Court, there was absolute fear on the other side. Mother Jones, in these times, the nation, all the progressive mouthpieces in the country were saying this was the end of unionism in America. It wasn't really the end of unionism. It was the end of compulsory unionism, perhaps. But it wasn't the end of unionism. We wouldn't want that. We wouldn't want that. If all of you want to join together voluntarily and have one voice and pick someone to speak for you, that's what we do in America. That's what we do. But we don't compel you. Harris v. Quinn was a mile marker on a road to end ultimately compulsory unionism. We have a bill in the United States Senate and the United States House. Bill, a one-page bill. No one thinks it's credible because it's only one page. You know, if you got a real bill, it's got to be 2,300 pages. You can't let anyone read it, for goodness sakes. It's a one-page bill, does not add one single word to federal law. Not one. Not one word. It simply goes back into that 1935 Act. It strikes out those provisions that authorize union officials to have a worker fired for failure to pay dues or fees, and that's it. It takes the bias of federal law from compulsion to voluntarism. That's what we need to do. We don't get much support from California, and especially the U.S. Senate on that bill. We need your help in that area. We absolutely need your help. There was a time when California probably would have led the way on something like that. Those times maybe in the distant past, but I believe there's a bright future for California. If states like Wisconsin can reform their labor relations, if states like Michigan can pass right to work, if Indiana can pass the right to work and lead the nation in new private sector job growth, if we can tell those stories over and over and over again, the time will come for even the people of this golden state to have that shine brightly again as a beacon for the rest of the country and restore freedom for America's workers. It's a privilege to get a chance to talk with you about this. You can tell I get a little excited about it. I do, I just do. It is now a passion for me. A wise man said once that if you love what you do, you never work a day in your life. And I can tell you I've only worked 3 days in 27 years. And a couple of tough days. But it's been a joy, it's been a privilege. And it really is a privilege more than anything else to get out into this great land, to meet great people. People that will stand up for liberty, stand up for individual freedom, and have the courage to have their voices heard. That inspires me. It inspires me to continue to fight for a cause that most people would say, well, you'll never win that fight. Well, maybe we will, maybe we won't. But it won't be for lack of fighting. And I hope you'll join with us in that fight. You can find out lots of information about our organization on the Al Gore's amazing internet. At www.nrtw.org. That's our foundation's website. Everything about our cases and information about your rights in the workplace are all there. NRTWC, the National Right to Work Committee.org, has a legislative website where we track legislation all over the country, including California. We still do pay attention, even though sometimes it seems like it's pretty futile. But we do pay attention. You can find out information about our bills there and the work that we're doing across the country. Again, it's a privilege to be with you this evening. I hope that we can expand this discussion through the question and answer. If I can't answer the question, I'll tell you. But if it's about right to work, I probably have a pretty good answer. That's the one thing I can answer. Okay? It's been a privilege to be with you. Thanks for the opportunity.
Okay, here's the first question. Where do you stand on the right of public unions to strike?
Where do I stand on the right of public unions to strike? Is that the question?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, that's a great question. And the idea of public unionism, first and foremost, let's separate public unions, the formation of public unions, and then the recognition of public unions. We need to do that because it's a big deal. The right for public employees to join unions, to join any private organization, to pay fees, to have people redress their government, perfectly protected, should be protected, must be protected, should occur, does occur, will occur. The idea that government is forced to recognize the union, on the other hand, is something that we have to have long discussions about. In fact, we really don't have to have long discussions about it because Franklin Roosevelt, the President of the United States, said it's unthinkable that we would unionize government, that we would force government to negotiate with unions on behalf of government employees. The AFL-CIO Executive Council thought they were opposed to it. We can't unionize government employees. We have no more rights than ordinary taxpayers to redress our government. And you know what? The AFL-CIO Executive Committee was right. Franklin Roosevelt was right. There is no place in our governmental structure where we actually, in the one instance in our form of government, where we give monopolistic force to an institution, we give it to government. We actually give it to them. We say, you have the right to exercise force in our system of government. Union officials, on the other hand, come alongside government as a monopoly, and they get involved with a monopoly, and they get a position above ordinary taxpayers to redress their government. It's wrong. In the Commonwealth of Virginia, where I live, we let anyone who wants to join a government union join a government union. We have an extremely strong firemen's union in the Commonwealth of Virginia. But we have a statute prohibiting the state from negotiating any terms and conditions of employment with union officials. They get to go to Richmond and they get to lobby and they get to walk there in their uniforms and hold signs and they get to vote and they get to politic and they get to do everything that ordinary citizens do. But we will not contemplate giving power to a private organization above ordinary citizens to redress the government. So I give you that answer to tell you that there should be no government strikes. You know, you can't use the power of a strike to withhold what are necessary services. Now, I know that government does a lot of things that are not necessary anymore. But the idea that we have a government providing these services that no one else provides makes it impossible to apply a strike model to that. Labor relations in America is a confrontational model. It doesn't have to be, but union officials have made it that way. It's a confrontational model. They make it out as a zero-sum game. Somehow if management wins, workers lose. Somehow if taxpayers win, government employees lose. That's not our system of government. And the model of our labor relations model is wholly inadequate for government. And therefore, there's not that question of government strikes. It's the question of giving union officials the power to even have the ability to call one. That's the original sin. So I'm against it. Thanks.
This is sort of a follow-up. There seems to be a decline in unionism in the private sector, but an increase in the local, state, and federal government. Why?
Yeah, that's a great point. Basically, today we have about 6.6% of the private sector workforce are in unions. About 35% of the government workforce are in unions across the country. Now, one might look at that and say there's a really easy answer to that question. And that answer is that government is a going concern that has, at least in theory, the fountain of youth revenue. It always bubbles up. There's no bottom line, arguably, in government, right? So if you're a union official and revenue is your model, would you rather be going after the steel industry today, or would you rather be going after California's state government? Who has more money and more ability to pay? And who can you have more influence on? So government unionism, I call that the final frontier for organized labor. It is the place where they want us to believe. Now, stick with this. A very, very wise gentleman from Temecula, California, called me up one day and lectured me on this, and I've used this ever since. I wish it was my idea. But he asked me a question. He called me and says, Mark, who's the worst employer in America? Who's the absolute scoundrel worst employer in America? I said, well, geez, I don't know that. He goes, well, what would be an indication of an employer who's not taking care of their employees? Would high unionization rates be an indication of that? Well, yeah. He goes, so union officials want us to believe that the government is the worst employer in America. They want us to believe that the conditions in government work are so dramatic that child labor laws are being violated that it's just absolutely terrible. Well, ladies and gentlemen, that's not the case. The case is that there's a revenue model there that they can impact through their power. And so that's why government's a perfect target for organized labor. At some point, if you go to a private concern and you say, these are our demands, and the employer says, I can't do that, we can't do that, this is not possible, and you say, I will demand this, we will not give in, there is a point where, in the private sector, that entity goes under. In the government sector, we have not yet plumbed that depth, although in Detroit, they're very close. They're very, very, very close. In California, you're getting closer by the minute. In Illinois, they're probably closer than you are, but they're pretty close too. You're close to them, they're closer to that moment when they're going to have to say, we can't do this anymore. So in the government sector, the reason why there's more influence here, that's really where the job growth has been. That's where the revenue model allows them to operate. And basically, they can operate without a bottom line. At least that's what they would say. And it's the wrong place for them to be. And it's the wrong model for them to have. And it's the wrong model for us as taxpayers as well.
Okay. Do you treat the minimum wage as a right to work issue?
Yeah, there's been a lot of talk about the minimum wage. I would say that no, it's not a right to work issue. I think the idea of wages is something that's not really understood well in this country. And I'll tell you this quick story. We were doing a Labor Day debate about, I want to say 4 years ago, but it's probably more like 8, and I probably checked it was 15. I'm getting older now, and my kids are older, and so, yeah, that was just a little while ago. Well, honey, that was 12 years ago. You know that? You're with me there? Okay, so I'm not going to try to dictate it, but we were debating union officials back and forth, and we were going. And a caller calls up and says, I don't want to hear any more from either of you guys. First he said, and either of you a lawyer. And we both said no. He said, okay, that's good. Now I can pay attention. Sorry. So he says, I don't want to hear anything else. I just want to hear what you think the minimum wage ought to be. And so the good news was the host on C-SPAN asked the union guy first. And he went through these calculations. He talked to cost of government. It was almost as if he took out a slide rule and started moving it up and down the scale and got that little cover thing right on the right price. He said, it ought to be $8.83. And so the host turned to me, Mr. Ricks, what do you think it ought to be? And I said, I don't know, $25 an hour. You watch the video, exactly what just happened there. There was not even a peep of noise. And the union guy finally says, that's absurd. I said, no, that's not absurd. Your position's absurd. And the host tried to sell things down. He goes, no, you need to explain that. Obviously, you need to explain that. That's absurd. I said, no. I said, do you realize how prices are set? This is a great example of Economics 101. Let's go through this. Do you think that the cost of labor has anything to do with the price of the product? And the guy said, that's absurd. Your whole line of thinking is absurd. I said, no, your position, if you believe that $8.83 can solve all the problems we have in the world, then $25 is triple the solving of all the problems we have in the world. Why not $25? And they wouldn't accept that, the rationale of that simple argument about the minimum wage. I mean, let's solve the problem. Make it $25 an hour. If you really believe that by simply saying that wages are going to be this, we can solve problems in America's workplace, then why wouldn't we do $25? And of course, the conversation ended badly. It just didn't go well. But I got back to my office. You'll love this. And it was actually another guy from California. I got back to my office. It was maybe about 9 o'clock Eastern Time or 9:30 Eastern Time. So it was 6:30 in the morning out here. And I don't expect anyone in California would want to watch anything on C-SPAN at 6 o'clock in the morning. But what do you do? So I get a call. I'm able to get calls through on my line because it was Labor Day, so we had a couple of there. But the guy calls me, says, is this Mr. Mix? I said, yeah, this is Mark Mix. And I thought, I get calls threatening my life and all this all the time. I really do. I'm sorry I stayed with affairs. But I said, yes, this is Mix. He's like, I want to tell you, I saw you at C-SPAN. So I said, okay, thanks. How do you think it went? So I want to tell you that when they asked that minimum wage question, I elbowed my wife on the couch and I said, someone ought to say $25. You said it. I elbowed my wife and she fell off the couch. And he just went off on it. He was a former Marine helicopter pilot, and we had a great conversation, and he really appreciated the fact that we talked about it. Now, minimum wage is not an issue that involves the right to work. Union officials would want to link minimum wage and right to work because they'd say, we're not for paying anybody anything. That's what they would say. The fact is that wages in right to work states are actually higher when it comes to purchasing power and disposable income than wages in force-using states. They can't get over that fact. They don't use those facts. They want to reduce the minimum wage. The idea of minimum wage, and you're going to get, LA is going to get one, $13.35 was announced today, Seattle's $15. I mean, if we really can solve the problem by setting wages, let's get it over with. Make it $50. I'll take $50 now. Who would take $50? We did that for about 3 weeks, and then things would go south very quickly. Yeah.
How much involvement did you have in the VW workers not to unionize?
Yeah, great question. Volkswagen. Volkswagen is a company, German company, obviously manufacturing cars. They wanted to build a facility in the United States. They built a facility back in 1985 in East Stroudsburg or East Westmoreland, Pennsylvania. They built in 1985. They brought the UAW in. The plant existed for 10 years. Everybody lost their jobs. They took the production facility out, went bankrupt, gone. They came back to Chattanooga, Tennessee, right to work state. And the United Auto Workers went down there, and Bob King, who was then the president of United Auto Workers, they now have a new president, Dennis Williams. Bob King said that in order for the UAW to survive, they had to unionize an auto manufacturer in a right to work state. What do they call it? They call it the ones that come from overseas. They have a name for it. They said their success depended, their future depended on unionization of the facility. Well, in Europe, labor policy over there is much different than America. In Europe, Volkswagen has a co-determination statute that says that union officials get to serve on the board of supervisors and are part of the management team in Europe as a requirement of law. Now, if it was happening regularly and they were doing that, that's all fine. We wouldn't want to keep with that. But union officials over there have a different relationship with their unions. And so Volkswagen comes over, the UAW goes down to Chattanooga, they start organizing the workers, and one day they announce that they have a majority of the workers signed up and that VW should recognize them as the bargaining agent for all the employees in the group. Well, we immediately got calls from Volkswagen employees, and we realized that Volkswagen was going to give the UAW what is called a card check election. To give you a quick primer on election law. Generally, in order to get a union, if we were going to unionize this company, we basically were divided into thirds. If all of these people signed a petition saying they wanted the union to represent them, and they sent that petition to the National Labor Relations Board, the National Labor Relations Board would determine that this is 30% of all the unit, and they would say, okay, we think this is an appropriate unit, we'll have a union election. At that point, the employer gets to choose whether or not he wants to have a secret ballot election, or if he just wants to recognize the union. If he gets the petition, accepts it, says, okay, everybody's in, then you're all in, unfortunately, you're all in. But the employer is the only one that can say, I want a secret ballot election. I want to give the workers a chance to go behind the curtain and put up their yay or nay. See how I voted? How do you think I voted? You'll never know, will you? Because I voted in secret. That's the way it should work. Union officials have they haven't had great success winning secret ballot elections. So what do? They hold card check elections, and they go out into the crowd, and they start walking around and say, hey, would you like to get more pay? Where do I sign? By signing that 3x5 card, you've now voted for the union. In Chattanooga, Tennessee, the UAW circulated these cards, and after about a 2.5-year period where they're circulating cards, they came out publicly and announced they had a majority. No one has ever seen the cards, they never showed anybody the cards, the employer never indicated they'd seen the cards, and so the UAW says, we think Volkswagen should recognize us. We actually got involved, we ended up representing the employees at Volkswagen. We were their lawyers. The National Right to Work Foundation was granted, because the UAW was on this side, VW was on this side, and the workers were on this side, and they had no representation. So the NLRB gave us the chance to represent them in the case. We were intervened on their behalf, and we were their lawyers. We filed 2 unfair labor practice charges, one against UAW, where we said that these petitions, these card check signatures that they're alleging are not true because you have to get them a certain way, you have to get them during a certain time. It's like groceries on a shelf. Groceries on a shelf have an expiration date. So do cars. They have to be a certain age because after a certain time, it's believed that there's no longer validity to the person. If it was 5 years ago, who knows if that worker's still there? You don't know. So there's a time freshness stamp on these things that's important. So we filed that unfair labor practice charge, and that raised the issue, the profile of the issue dramatically. And then Volkswagen, one of their union board members over in Germany, made a public statement that said that if the workers didn't vote for the union, then Volkswagen was not going to cite the new SUV frame in Chattanooga. They weren't going to expand the business. And so all these jobs that were going to be created wouldn't be created in Chattanooga. If an employer would have said that to the employees during a union drive, he'd almost be in jail. It would be the unfair labor practice charges would be filed so fast that the revolving door of the NLRB would become an air conditioner. Seriously, you can't say those types of things during an ordinary drive. But this guy says it, so we filed an unfair labor practice charge against Volkswagen. By this time, the Volkswagen PR people are saying, this doesn't look good for us. So what do? They agree to a secret ballot election. And that secret ballot election, albeit happens 9 days after they announced this, and Volkswagen signs what's called an agreement with UAW allowing them access to the property. They get to wear T-shirts on the property. They get to talk to all the workers on the property. Of course, if you're against it, you don't get any of those privileges. You can't say anything. So in 9 days, they conduct an election with 1,600 employees. And by a 53-46% ratio, the workers at Volkswagen voted against the UAW. So, yeah. We had one of the lead plaintiffs in the case with us at our annual meeting in Tennessee this last year in Memphis, or we were in Atlanta this year. And what a great story he told. He told a story of just workers that were being intimidated, the workers that didn't know what they were doing, they weren't getting any leadership anywhere, and when the employees stood up on their own, they were able to fight this off. Now, unfortunately, the UAW is back there. They formed a new local union in Chattanooga. They're interesting enough, they're going to set a new precedent. They're going to do member-only bargaining. They're not going to bargain for another. They're doing exactly what we said they could do for all these years. They said we can't do that. They're doing it now in Chattanooga. Look, if the workers want to join a union down there and the process is fair and clean, and they allow them to vote in private, then we shouldn't have any problem with that. If they want to join a union, that's up to them. What's happening there is Volkswagen's pretty much in favor of it. We think there will probably be some kind of a recognition by Volkswagen probably within the next 5 or 6 months. We still have workers on retainer, we still represent them. So we were, I think that's a long answer to your question. We were involved in Volkswagen. Yeah.
Please address the forced UFW legislation passed today. What will happen if Brown signs it?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that again?
It says, please address the forced UFW legislation passed today. What will happen if Brown signs it?
UFW. Sorry. Oh, United Farm. Oh, right. The agricultural workers. Right. You know, there's different labor law in America. You have a Farm Labor Act. In California, you have your Farm Labor Board and all this, and you have your National Relations Board. We have represented numerous strawberry pickers and tomato pickers, and unfortunately, while I don't know the exact details, there's a big drive right now to kind of force all these workers into unions without a vote, again, by this card check recognition scheme. We do have some clients out in California in the agricultural field. I'm not familiar exactly with all the details of that right now, but I know that we've been contacted by folks, and we're still working in that area. I forget what the strawberry pickers, what company was the strawberry company, we ended up, those workers did not get forced into the union, which was a pretty big victory for us. But I can't comment specifically on what's going on right now.
The Brown farm issue down there, they had a vote, they voted, and they didn't count the votes.
They impounded the ballots, is that right? Is this the vote where the union was installed like 20 years ago and they're 44? Yeah, we have talked to people there. I don't know if we have specific legal action, but this was the notion that these people, all of a sudden the union went away for a certain period of time. There was a vote way back when. The union went away for a while, and then they came back and said all of a sudden everyone owes us union dues. And I think what happened was the workers decided they were going to vote to decertify the union, to throw them out. They had to vote, and then the Agricultural Labor Board impounded the ballots and won't count them. That's the situation. Yeah, they impound. That's okay. Thank you. Yeah.
Okay. Unions support candidates without any vote of its members. CEOs support candidates without any votes of its shareholders. What's the difference?
Yeah, that's one of the main arguments that union officials will use about how when we start to regulate campaign finance. I would say the big difference is that union officials can force people to pay them. They can force the people to pay them dues as a condition of their employment. You know, the argument on the shareholder side is that public corporations generally are, they avoid the risk that comes with the political identification. In any given election year, union officials give 92 to 98% of all their money to one party. Business leaders give 60% of their money to the people in power and 40% of the money to the people not in power, just to hedge their bets. They're very courageous about that. But the idea of shareholders, about shareholders' money is, in theory, when you could sell stock, you could do that, and union officials say, well, you can quit your job if you don't like what in politics. I would say the compulsion factor on the union side tilts the balance against them and their arguments. I mean, private public corporations, might have stockholders that disagree with that. They can go redress the corporate meeting. They can talk to the CEO. They can sell their stock. They can put together a group to put pressure on the CEO. It's not a perfect answer, but when you add the compulsion on the union side, I think you can see the injustice there.
What effect will Stockton bankruptcy have on California?
Yeah, I guess we don't really know. The one issue that really remains kind of the 800-pound or the elephant in the room, the gorilla in the room or whatever. I need that is the whole pension issue. I mean, I think the courts have already said that the contracts can be changed, can be altered, be reformed to change the operating model, but it's the pension issue that really is the big one. I don't think the court has ruled on it yet. The court has ruled you can't change the pension liability, and really that's where the big problem is. In Detroit, that's the same issue they're dealing with there as the pension. And the really sad part of all this is that there are a lot of great government employees, a lot of teachers, a lot of nurses, a lot of police officers that have been promised these things. They've been promised these things, and they did their jobs. They did it well. And they just overpromised. And at some point, they're going to look into the eyes of these people that have served your children and protected your communities and say, you can't do it. You can't do it. It can't be done. And those those promises are going to be broken. And that's really what the real injustice is here. I think, more so Stockton was kind of the leader. Detroit is really kind of the case study now as to how it's going to work. I guess they're going to sell they're not going to sell their art collection. Someone's going to donate money and whatever it is, their $3 billion in artwork that they had and all this stuff. I don't understand why a city needs to own that much money in art. But I think the issue of public bankruptcies, we've got a city like Stockton, we've got a big city like Detroit, and the next question is, will they let a state go bankrupt? That's the real question. I don't know if they will or not. But the precedents that are established in Stockton about being able to set aside the contracts and the way they're doing business and all the things in negotiation on the terms of employment is a good development. Where they're going to go on the pensions is really the big thing, because I think that's the real big debt that overhangs the whole situation here. And I don't think they've decided that yet.
Okay. Do government unions have an inherent conflict of interest? Democrats run governments, unions contribute to Democrats make decisions regarding union pay.
Yeah, that's kind of that vicious cycle that I talked about. And it's that government union official in California who said, this is kind of cool, you get to elect your own boss. That's the inherent problem with compulsory unionism in the government sector. It manifests itself really well here in California, that's for sure. But it is an inherent conflict, yeah.
Do you have a pending case in Santa Clara County at the Valley Medical Center?
Do we have, sorry?
A pending case in Santa Clara County?
I don't. We're representing a lot of nurses out here. We have been going toe-to-toe with Kaiser Permanente, and we've been going toe-to-toe with the National Nurses Association, which is a spin-off of the California Nurses Association, and they've kind of spread their wings and gone to the east, and we've been fighting them. I'm not sure if we have a specific case there, but we do represent a lot of nurses in a lot of issues where the company and the union are trying to push them into this representation and force them into it. And I would say probably 10% of our entire workload. We have 262 active cases today. We're representing literally thousands and thousands of workers all across the country. And we provide this legal aid for free. We don't charge anyone for the fees, and we don't get legal fees when we win cases. There's a certain type of case that we do, but not most of them we don't. We don't survive on legal fees at all. In fact, last year I think our total legal fees were $100,000 or something like that. It was 2012, not 2013. But we have got about 10% of those cases are probably in the nursing sector on behalf of nurses around the country.
Okay. Is the only thing that distinguishes a right-to-work state from a non-right-to-work state compulsory union dues?
Absolutely. It really is that simple. It is that simple. Union officials want to blame everything else on right to work, but the right to work law in those 24 states simply says that everyone has the right to join a union. They can do whatever they want on that side, but they can't be compelled to pay dues or fees to get a job. That's it. The laws are very simple, very straightforward, and that's all they do. Union officials want to kind of attach barnacles to it to make it look worse than it is, but literally that's what the law says in 24 states.
Can you tell us about any pending cases that would be of interest in California or locally?
Yeah, as a matter of fact, we have, there's actually a very big case in California right now that's not ours, it's in the Ninth Circuit called Friedrich. It's a teacher, and it's going at the very core of compulsory unionism based on our Harris versus Quinn victory. We're taking our Harris versus Quinn victory on behalf of personal and healthcare providers, and we're expanding it to all government employees. That's the goal of the next year. We have 3 cases, 2 of them here in California, and we have 1 in Texas, and we have 1 in Massachusetts that will actually expand Harris v. Quinn. The big case in California is the Friedrich case. That's being run by a law firm funded by the Center for Individual Rights, I think is the name of the group that does it. But it's direct right off of the Harris v. Quinn victory when they took that case and said, okay, now we have a teacher who is similarly situated. She can't be forced to speak politically either, so therefore we ought to expand the Harris precedent to every government employee. So no government employee can be forced to pay fees. The case we have 2 cases in California. Both of them are at the district court level right now, but we're litigating. I would say we probably have 30 or 40 cases in California for teachers and other employees. But the 2 big ones we have are of the same vein of Harris v. Quinn to expand the protection to every government employee, not just home health care providers and personal care providers. We hope that one case will make it to the Supreme Court next year. Hopefully, that's the goal.
There were several questions I was kind of consolidated, but basically they address the how do workers combat the fear of retaliation.
Yeah. You know, that's probably one of the biggest problems we have is that, you know, let's say you're a teacher at a local school, and you're in the faculty room, and all these people are your friends. So you got two teachers that teach the same grade as you, you got TAs, you got all these people, and all of a sudden you raise a question about unionization. You say, why do we support the teachers union? I don't think they're doing the right thing. Probably one of the most effective weapons the union has is that peer pressure inside that faculty room, and the peer pressure inside that workplace. That they, you know, you start rocking the boat. And I have been so surprised and so saddened by the stories that people tell us about best friends in a workplace when one makes a decision about unionization and the other one doesn't, and they never talk again. And the pressure and the intimidation on teachers in the faculty room and other government employees, you know, to sit down and somehow they think that you're taking away their livelihood by not supporting the union, when generally these people are looking at the political stance that unions take. And you can't look at the union agenda on several issues and they are really polarizing issues where they're split right down the middle. And you know, if I gave an issue in here, there'd probably be half people for it, half people against it. But I can't force you to support a cause that you disbelieve in. But in America's unionized government workplace, they can force people to do that. And the intimidation is really bad. And it gets to a point in the private sector where there's violence. You know, there's a case right now in Philadelphia, you may have read about it, where there were an Amish, I think it was an Amish church, a Mennonite church was trying to be built, and they were using a non-union contractor. The union came in, they burnt the place down, they destroyed all the equipment. The union official, the president of the union sends out a text to a couple of the boys and did the same, nice hit, quote unquote. And so they go to court, and there's this racketeering charge filed against them. And believe it or not, and I'll be quick about this, but there was a Supreme Court decision in 1973 called the Enmons decision, E-N-M-O-N-S, that says that union officials cannot be prosecuted under federal law for acts of violence that are used to achieve legitimate union objectives. You can't make this stuff up, ladies and gentlemen. I'm telling you. No, it's there. It came from a case out of Louisiana. There was a big strike down there, and these guys were shooting out electric transformers. And the court said, well, as long as the union's trying to get a legitimate union objective, i.e. a pay raise, or these things, they can't be prosecuted under federal law. Now, all of us can be prosecuted under federal law, no question about it, for racketeering extortion, but union officials can't. Unfortunately, that decision has gotten other states to say, well, you know, we can't enforce the law against unions and labor disputes unless the governor tells us we can. The governor's an elected official, right? Now it becomes a political decision whether or not you're going to let the state police enforce the law. Union officials have a unique privilege in that way. And this Enmons decision has spawned really kind of a get-out-of-jail-free mentality where union officials can say, well, we can do this. The judge in Philadelphia, this is kind of the silver lining. Because the union was going after a non-union company, there was no legitimate union objectives, he said they could be prosecuted for law. But he said in his decision, if they were going after a unionized company trying to get the same thing, they couldn't be prosecuted under the law for these acts of violence. So the only thing they made a mistake by going after a non-union company using these tactics as opposed to a unionized company. Otherwise, they could have been prosecuted. In Buffalo, New York, in a big extortion campaign up there, organized crime was involved in a union. They stabbed a guy in the neck. They put sugar in all the gas tanks of all his equipment, and they used the Enmons decision. She said, you can't prosecute us. Enmons protects us for prosecution. The Daily News strike in 1991 in New York. One day, they're out in the Daily News. There's a big strike. 300 policemen are out there in full uniform protesting in front of the building. The head of security of the Daily News calls up the FBI and says, what do you do? Who do you call when the police are out front protesting against your business? He said, well, it's a labor dispute, right? The FBI usually says, and you can look this up, it's in a book called Vigilante. It's called by Rich Vigilante. It's called a book called Strike. The FBI usually says, we can't do anything because of the Enmons decision. So that kind of intimidation, unfortunately, is established in Supreme Court precedent and some laws, and it's probably one of the biggest tools you can use. You know, when you can't make any other argument, that's about where you end up, right there. That's it?
That's it, thank you.
Thank you.